Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is your machine settings for when you're sewing with knits. There's a couple things on your machine that you're going to want to do a little bit differently when you're working with a knit instead of a woven fabric. So the first one is what we already talked about, that you're going to switch your stitch to a zigzag. And like I said, if you have a different stitch that you really like that can achieve the same thing, then it's okay to use that one. But I'm going to stick with the zigzag for this because whether you have a really top of the line machine or the most basic beginner machine, you're probably all going to have a zigzag stitch. So that's just an easy one that we can all have the same stitch to talk about. So right here on mine, I'm going to switch it. Mine's stitch number 11, and I have one that I just push the button and it automatically sets it. And if you have a machine that has a dial, a lot of machines have that. You'll just switch it to the zigzag stitch on the dial. Just turn the dial to that. And on here, you can see that my width is default set to 3.0. Yours might have a W next to it, and it might be done with a little turn dial. Mine's right here on the screen, 3.0. And then the length is 1.5. So the width is how far apart the needle's going to go, side to side, and then the length is how the distance from one stitch to the next one. So the width would be like it zigzags how far, and then the length is how far down it goes each time. Now, mine has a default 3.0 and 1.5 like I said, but I found that I don't really like using the default setting. And I tested it out here, and when I use that stitch, it's actually really wavy. It's almost too close together, so whenever it's going through, it's actually pulling the fabric, and then when I take it back out, the fabric is kind of wavy, so that's not the stitch that I want to use. So instead, what I recommend doing is just changing up the stitch width and the stitch length, and then testing out a couple rows and seeing which one is going to work the best for your fabric. Especially each time you switch to a different type of fabric, you might retest it just to see what works best for that fabric. This one's a rayon, and it's really thin, and so it stretches really easily. And I'll even hold it up here just so you can see up close how each of these are a little bit different. Okay, so once I found the width and length that I like, I actually wrote it out on a piece of painter's tape or the little washi tape, and I just wrote it on there and taped it on the front of my machine. Knits, use the mode 11, which is my zigzag stitch. The width I like is 4.5, so I can go to that. And the length that I like best is 3.0, so I can automatically put that in. And that might be really helpful if you're not sewing every single day. Let's say you only get your machine out once a week or once a month, and you might forget in between projects, what was that width that I really liked? And instead of going through all the time it takes to test everything, just tape it to the front of your machine, or in your owner's manual, just make a little note, and that way you know, when I sew with knits, this is the setting I like. And you might have to tweak it a little bit each time when you switch, to a really specific type of fabric that's a lot different from what you normally use, but for the most part, you'll just have it right there and it'll be easy to remember.